The question is, what's the Talmud? In order to understand this idea, first we have to understand what's the chain of transmission of the teachings that God gave to the Jewish people at Mount Sinai through Moses. And the idea is like this. There are basically two expressions of these teachings. First expression is a written Torah, a written expression, written teachings. That means a specific text that usually in Hebrew we call it Tanakh. That means Torah, 5 books of Moses, Nevi'im, that means the prophets, and Ksuvim, that means writings, including Psalms and including Song of Songs and many other writings. These particular writings are, as the name expresses, writings. That means they have been passed generation after generation in a written form. And each single phrase, each single word, each single letter has been carefully, very, very carefully passed down. And there are very, very few places where we have doubts whether it's this letter or that letter. Should be written like this or should be written like that. After so many years, thousands of years, just having doubts on few letters, not so bad, This is one expression of the teachings, Torah. The second expression is an oral teaching, oral Torah. That means that together with the written law, God gave Moshe, an oral expression, an oral explanation of those laws. And these two things go together, hand by hand. You cannot have one without the other. If you only have a written Torah, you don't know what it's talking about, because most of the commandments, mitzvot, are not really understandable just from the text. And if you only have an oral expression, an oral explanation, and it's not based on a written explanation, it doesn't mean anything. What is it based on? It's because somebody thought about it. So they both together, and they are just, that's like a security box with two keys, so to speak. You have to have both codes, both keys, in order to open this box. In order to understand the will of God, you need both ideas, both expressions. Now, with the passing of time and the difficulties that the Jewish people lived around the entire history, even though the written part was passed down very precisely generation after generation, the oral part started suffering, not modifications, but rather forgetting things and overlooking details, etc. So there was one rabbi around the year 180 of the Common Era, Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi, Rabbi Yehuda the Prince. He decided to write part of the oral Torah. That means that part of it remained oral and part of it remained in a written way. So there is such a thing that is called Mishnah. It's the name of the book that expresses in a written form that which was oral up to that time. And from that time on, the sages used to pass this book around, which actually was in parchment with ink, etc., etc. They used to pass this book around, and everybody was learning this book. After years passed, around the year 450, Rav Ashi and Ravina, two sages, decided to write down what is called Gemara. Gemara means the explanations of the Mishnah, because after a few hundred years, things were not so clear and not so easy to understand. The Mishnah is written in Hebrew. The Gemara is written in Aramaic, because at the times of Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, people spoke Hebrew. In the times of Rav Ashi, of the Gemara, people spoke Aramaic. So there were doubts on really what it means and how to extract the practical law out of it, etc. So they decided to write Gemara. Now, Mishnah plus Gemara make a book called Talmud. But it doesn't finish over there. After the Talmud was actually closed, so to speak, around the year 450 of the Common Era, other commentators came up, so to speak, and they started commenting and they started adding ideas to the oral Torah. So the written Torah is like a fixed body, a thing that does not change. And the oral Torah is something that grows year after year, generation after generation, grows in understanding and deepness and extracting from the original sources, Mishnah and Gemara, more ideas and more ideas. And this happened, again, generation after generation. First came what is called Rabbanan Savorai, right after the finishing of the Talmud. These rabbis actually added a few points over here, over there, to clarify laws or to explain other ideas, etc. Then came Geonim, the geniuses, the leaders of the houses of study in Iraq, Babylon, etc. Then came Rishonim, the first commentators, Rashi in France, Rambam in Spain, Ramban also in Spain, etc. Then came the Shulchan Aruch, the Code of Jewish Law, in around the year 1500s in Eretz Israel. Rabbi Yosef Karos sat down and he wrote the law, so to speak, how it comes out of the Mishnah, the Gemara, the Rabbanan Savorai, the Geonim, the Rishonim, and he started a new era, so to speak, of Acharonim, the last commentators, until today. So we see, as time passes, Torah should be al-peh. The oral Torah grows and grows and grows. And one might think that today, since we have technology, since we have artificial intelligence and blah, 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 we're closer to the truth than before. But the truth is that the other way around is true. As close as you are from the source to the source, the closer you are to the truth, so to speak, to the giving of the Torah at Mount Sinai. At that particular point, God revealed himself and he gave the absolute, complete truth. And as generations pass and we get further and further from the source, from the root of it all, we get further and further from the truth. That's why it expands these books, so to speak, which is not just one book, it's hundreds and hundreds of books of oral Torah, which comprise altogether, so to speak, Talmud. This grows and grows in understanding and in deepness to be able to extract an idea, a law, a practical thing from the original sources. So the question was, what's the Talmud? I explained, Mishnah plus Gemara. But in general, it's talking about the body of learning, of Jewish learning, to know exactly what's the will of God. And the only ones, and I repeat this, stress, the only ones that really keep these laws are Orthodox Jews all around the world. They take the original sources, they take the written Torah, and they take the oral Torah with all its expressions, generation after generation, and show, the big sages, the big rabbis do this, they show how in the original giving of the Torah at Mount Sinai to Moses, etc., you have a specific law, you have a specific teaching that God is giving us. Because after all, to finish, the idea of Torah comes from the word hoira, which means teaching. The main point is not exactly what I want the text to say, because I want to interpret this and I want to allow this and that. The main thing is to try to know and understand what really God wants from each one of us.